So, any of you out there having trouble sleeping, I just want to tell this story. I'm up here late at night too. And part of the reason I want to tell this story is because, earlier tonight when I tried to tell it on Insight Timer, nobody was there. And it's a really good story. And I hope it helps people to sleep and feel more comfortable and stuff. Now, this story comes to me from a great storyteller named Paul Pringle. And it's the beautiful story of where dreams come from. Now, even though it's a Scottish story, Paul has given me permission to relate it to a culture with which I'm more familiar and relates to me. So the story goes like this. There were three girls, three sisters, in fact, and they were going high into the mountains all day looking for the sweetest blackberries. And they kept going throughout the mountains, but the oldest sister was more fleet of foot and more anxious to capture the best and the most blackberries more than her sisters, I guess because she was the oldest. So she went on ahead of her other two sisters. And as the sun started to set, she realized that she had separated herself from her siblings. And she turned around and looked, and they were gone. A mist had appeared instead. And she was very frightened because they were deep into the mountains, and she wasn't quite sure how she would get back to the shore because she couldn't see anything. So she went higher up into the mountains, and the mist was over, blocking everything until she got way up high near the top of the mountain. And she could overlook all of the mist and see how deep and wide the mountain range was. And as she was up there, she saw the sun beginning to set, and she became very, very frightened. And it also started to become cold, even though it was very, very beautiful. And out of the corner of her eye in the distance, she saw an object. And she became even more frightened because she knew that giants live in the mountains. And these giants will eat human beings. So she became very frightened that what she saw might be a giant coming towards her. But as it got closer, the object, she was less frightened because she saw that it was a herd of deer, in fact, a herd of deer. And the deer came up right where she was through all the mountains very, very quickly. And when the deer got to where she was, they stopped and spent time around her. And she felt very comfortable with the deer, and the deer felt very comfortable with her. They were mostly female deers and just a few bucks. And so, as the deer began to leave, she went with them. And she thought that the deer would take her down the mountain back to her sisters where she had come from. But in fact, the deer took her further and further into the mountains and away from the destination where she wanted to go. But she stayed with the deer because the footing was so sure on the path that they followed. So she stayed with the deer, and they came up into a place where the path got very, very thin, and they all went through single file. And then it opened up again. And when it opened up, they were at a great big cave. And in the cave was an old man and an old woman. And the girl could see that they were both staring into this dark pool that was in the center of the cave. And as the deer arrived, the old woman noticed and she picked up her bucket and went out to meet the deer. And the girl, seeing the old woman, ran up to her and fell to her knees and said, "Please, please, can you help me? I've gotten lost up here in the mountains picking blackberries, and you can have these berries if you will just allow me to stay the night." And so the old woman took the blackberries and she said, "Wait right here and I'll be right back." And she went with the blackberries and talked to the old man. And they talked in a language and in a tongue that the girl did not understand. And so the old woman came back to the girl and said to her, "For one night we cannot let you stay, but if you'll stay for a year and a night, you may stay." Well, the girl was lost all the way up in the mountains. She had no idea how to get back to where she was going or where she would sleep that night. And these were the first humans that she had encountered or sign of life other than the deer. So she had no choice, and she stayed with the old woman. She agreed, "I will stay with you for a year and a day." And the old woman said, "This is good because I am old and I need help." And so the girl observed as the old woman began to milk the deer into her pail. And she saw the old woman take the pail of milk back into the cave, and the deer left and went off again. And so she began to see that what the role was that the old woman would take the milk and make a type of cheese from it. She would spend all day making this cheese from the milk. And the old man would stare into the dark pool. And as he stared into the dark pool, he would see formations and he would manipulate the cheese so that it looked just like the formations that he saw. And these formations were the dreams. And each night, the old man and the old woman, they would gather the dreams into his hands, into his left hand and in his right hand. And he would carry the dreams from the cave to the very edge of the mountain. And he would hold his hands up. And in his left hand, he had all of the bad dreams and all of the dark birds with the burden of carrying on them. Birds like vultures and ravens and crows and even bats. They would come and take the dreams from his left hand and fly throughout the earth and insert the dreams into the minds of people as they were sleeping. But the dreams in his right hand were all of the good dreams. And so all of the most beautiful and powerful birds, like the eagle and the cardinal and even the wren, would take the dreams from the right hand, and they too would fly throughout the earth, and they would insert the dreams into people's minds as they slept. And every day the old man did this. And all day the old woman would make the cheese, and the old man would stare into the dark pool and make the formations that he would carry to the mountain. And so the girl stayed with the old woman for the year. And the old woman taught her many, many, many things. She taught her all about how to make the cheese, all about the herbs that grew in the forest, and even a few things about how to communicate to the animals. And so finally the 1 year came up, the 1 year and a day. And the old woman said, "You can stay here with us, or you can return back down the mountain." And the little girl thought about it. While she was an older girl now, this teenage girl. She's an old teenager, 18 years old, 19. And she thought, this isn't a bad place up here. These dreams are so wise and they teach me so much and they have so much imagination. But these people are not really people, and I long to be with my own kind. So she told the old woman that she would prefer to return back to the earth where she had come from. And the old woman said, "I will miss you, but I will fulfill my part of the bargain." And so she whispered into one of the old male deer, one of the buck's ears, whispered some instructions to him. And the old woman turned to the 19-year-old girl now and said to her, "Follow this buck and he will take you where you want to go." And so the girl could not communicate with the buck, but she followed him. And they went, and where she thought they would be going, somewhere close to the direction she had come from, the buck did not take her. Instead, it took her on another path, and she was unfamiliar with all of the things and the places where they went. They traveled for a long time until they came to a lake. And when they arrived at the lake again, the girl looked around and she didn't see anything familiar to her, but it looked like the buck had stopped. And it looked across the water of the lake, and there were many canoes that were coming towards where the girl and the buck were standing. And the girl thought to herself, "Why has he led me here? This is not my home, and this looks nothing like my home." And sure enough, as the canoes arrived, there was one young man who was very, very handsome, had many feathers too, which showed that he was a great warrior, a great man. And he stood in the canoe as it arrived on the shore, and he walked up to the girl and said to her, "You are the woman of my dreams," he says. "I have dreamt of you for as long as I can remember, and now you are here. And during this past year, my dreams have become more and more intense about you. So please," he said, "can you fulfill my vision and marry me and come back to my people?" And the girl sat there and she thought. She didn't know where to go. She really had no choice. This was a very handsome man, and he seemed to be a man of good means. So she agreed with him that she would marry him and return with him and live amongst his people. And this meant that she would probably never see her sisters again. And sure enough, the girl lived with the young man and lived for a very, very long time. And during the time that she was among the people, the woman became a very powerful leader because she taught the people, she could explain to the people what their dreams meant. And as a result of this, the people grew to be very, very wise, and they were all grateful for her and the things that she taught them. as a result of her time with the old man and the old woman who were the source of all the dreams in the world. And that's the story. And I think it's a really profound story because it's about womanhood and it's about, how girls may have certain incredible advantages like beauty or strength or wisdom, but somehow in a girl's life as she becomes a woman, she is encountered with a challenge. And the challenge is such that whatever natural tools she has, they don't really help her. She has to humble herself and work very, very hard to overcome the challenge. But when she does, there is a great reward. And when you think about it, it is the woman of the mating that tells and interprets the dreams of the man and the family. Because as we all know as men, no dream that you have will ever come to fruition unless the woman agrees to it. And so that is my story for tonight. And if any of you out there are having trouble sleeping, you try and recite this entire story from beginning to end with all of the details. And I have found when I try to do stuff like that, when I try to recite the stories that I've heard, sure enough, after a time, I will fall right asleep because there's so many details in any given story and it kind of exhausts the mind. So I wish you all good night, blessing for your strength, for your health, and for sweet dreams. Thank you so much for joining me. Good night.